So what we are talking about is about taking that art and making it into a science. And what do I mean by a science? We're talking about understanding that money isn't just money because it lands in the till, but there are processes that support, the flow of money from a point where it's generated, from a point where it has to be managed, from a point where it has to be protected, in other words, sustained, and to a point where it can be grown.
Hello and welcome once again to yet another episode of The Truth in Development, powered by Ntiyiso Consulting. My name is Aubrey Masango, and we continue a series of conversations around the value proposition of Ntiyiso Group. One of those components of their greater value proposition is designing organizations, companies that have a predictable, sustainable revenue collection generation process. And to discuss this is the Group Chief Advisor, Mr. Mielani Holeni, who joins me now. Tadani, are you well this evening?
Oh, I'm very well, Aubrey. And thank you very much for having me here.
I appreciate you coming through.
Looking
really
forward to the conversation about money.
Businesses are in the business of making money. And very often, that very conversation is a very difficult one to have. I'm not really sure why yet, because a lot of people go into business, but then they don't focus on making money. Part of the philosophy at Ntiyiso is our clients must make money. Tell me about that whole philosophy and how you approach it, especially in waking that part of the entrepreneurial process up.
Yeah, so I think the issue is one must never take it for granted that just by you starting a business or having an organization that is revenue-based, people will just walk in and want to pay you the money. And I'll take different examples as I go along, whether it's from a public sector point of view. If you take a tax collection entity such as SARS, you take as well the municipalities within local government that have a revenue generating capability. You also take the private sector in terms of take the television stations that are there, take the various retail stores that are there. So the issue here is that whereas there's an art that people started perfecting of making money, that art becomes only known to those organizations because that is their art, that is their craft. They know it well and they can use it to generate money multiple times and so on. So what we are talking about is about taking that art and making it into a science. And what do I mean by a science? We're talking about understanding that money isn't just money because it lands in the till, but there are processes that support the flow of money from a point where it's generated, from a point where it has to be managed, from a point where it has to be protected, in other words, sustained, and to a point where it can be grown. So those are all the steps that one needs to think about whenever you're talking about how to create revenue, how to create wealth, and how to be sustainable as an organization. So those are the blocks, that says there's a value chain to things. Whereas in the other episodes, on the other discussions that we've had, we've spoken about the customer, we've spoken about the wonderful things around the value propositions, we've defined what a value proposition is and what a product is. The money is the one that is tendered to be able to buy or pay for the product or the value proposition or the service. But that science is one that we need to understand and harness. So in summary, I'm saying the revenue generation is crucial, and there are tactics to how to get to generate revenue. The revenue management is a crucial aspect because you don't want to mismanage and lose that money that you've generated. You also want to protect and sustain the generation activities of revenue, which is protecting that revenue, as well as growing it. Because what good are you if you have a business that cannot generate money, that cannot manage money properly, that cannot protect that money and sustain it, as well as grow it for the future. So that is how, at least, if we talk about the science of revenue, we are talking about those 4 crucial things.
One of the things that we've discussed in other episodes, especially when we were discussing strategy, is the fact that, first of all, whatever value you are proposing to the market has got to be desirable. The market must want whatever it is that you are putting out there. It's got to be feasible, so it's got to be practical, but it's also got to be viable. And that is the space that you and I are going to be playing in this conversation, the viability of your business. And one of the things that I've come to understand through the other conversations is that your value proposition can't be a value proposition that only makes you as the business feel good about the fact that you can make this happen. It must meet a need, and it must therefore be paid for. Let's talk about that science of the creation of revenue on the basis of the idea of viability for a business that is going out into the market. What are the mindsets for the entrepreneur, for the business, for the board of directors? What are the mindsets that must be in place in order for a feasible, desirable idea to be viable, monetarily speaking?
So one of the things that from Ntiyiso Consulting Group point of view that we are known for is to help municipalities, local government as a whole, to improve their cash positions. And I think, let me take that as one of the examples, and I'll give 3 different examples. One which will touch the local side of things, because if you take a municipality, essentially it's a business. A municipality relies on a customer coming to pay for the usage of electricity, of water, of sanitation, of refuse collection, as well as perhaps a tax for the properties, because that property is located on the soil and the jurisdiction of that municipality, and that property has other services that are around it, such as the roads, such as the street lights, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about that viability of a municipality, and regardless of where it is for now. So let's forget, the geography or the location of it. A municipality to be viable means that it must be able to supply, firstly, that particular service. If it's electricity, it also has a supplier that it must obtain the service from, and it must be able to pay for that service from that supplier to be able to.
There's a value chain.
There's a value chain
Right.
to it. So if you just take that value chain thought, the fact that someone supplies electricity, because municipalities are not yet in the position to generate their own electricity. Municipalities, not all of them, in fact, they're in the minority that those that have their own water sources, like dams and so on and so forth. So they have to go and source it from a supplier that is going to supply the services. For them to have the receptacles, the dustbins, the big ones, the small ones, the 240 liters, the landfill sites, and all of that, there's a value chain that, if one follows it, waste on its own, there's a value chain from the time that you pick up that receptacle into the truck and so on and so forth. But here's the key thing about viability. Those things must be predictable. In other words, I must wake up in the morning, or whenever I wake up, and go and flick a switch, and the lights must come on. So let's subtract, load shedding for now. Let's park the issue of load shedding for now. So I must be able to flick a switch, and the lights must come on. Okay? I must be able to open a tap, and the water must flow. I must be able to flush the lavatory, and the water must flow as well into the various areas and so on. My dustbin cannot sit and be so full that it smells and so on and so forth. So the viability of a business centers around understanding the products or the value proposition or the services that they offer to the greater population. And of course, you must have a greater population for you to be viable. But that service must be predictable. You must be able to flick a switch, it works, tap open, water, receptacle picked up on this day without fail, put in the right place.
So what you're saying to me that the consumer
absolutely
of whatever service that is given by your client, as in Ntiyiso, municipality, must be predictably available.
Must be always available, must be of a quality that is acceptable. So in other words, we've subtracted the issue of load shedding.
Sure.
So if there is always a power failure within that municipality, it means that, I don't have the service available when I want it. I don't have the service available when I need it. So if you take an example of the extreme side where I'm on an oxygen device and there is no electricity and because of the constant interruptions, if there is no water simply because there are burst pipes, not because of the supplier of the municipality cannot supply the water, as you can have outages. If the receptacles are not collected, so then it's not a service that you can rely upon. Right. Therefore, it starts to affect how the consumer starts to think about you as a business in the public sector space, and they start making other means, or they can start making other means, sink a borehole so that I avoid buying from you. Guess what that does? It means you have lost the opportunity to bill that particular customer for the consumption that would then you add a margin, remember, from your own supplier, so you've missed the opportunity to bill however the kiloliters that consumer would use, so it means there's less revenue for you that's going to come in. And therefore, given your operation that you need to sustain, if you continuously have a dwindling, decreasing revenue, you are sitting at a point where you start to become non-viable.
So what you are essentially saying is that part of the science of revenue creation for any organization, you've used the example of municipality, but for any organization, because the principle is true for any organization, is that you must, as an organization, as a business, provide a good or a service that is predictable both in its availability and its quality. And that is part of the way by which you can ensure a more steadier, predictable stream of revenue?
Absolutely. And I think let's take it a step further. You need to price it correctly. Okay? So it cannot be an assumption that, because, NERSA, which is the regulator for electricity, has given Eskom a double-digit increase, that you also need to just apply the same double-digit, increase. So there's also the issues of cost of supply. What does it cost me to supply this product realistically, so that I can still have a client at the end of the day? So yes, there's a regulation that says apply a double-digit, but hang on, I can afford to apply a single-digit, because that will then encourage, the affordability, or will at least increase the affordability from my end users, that they will then continue to use my service. So I've made it reliable, I've made it predictable, I've made it available. Then I must price it correctly, so that, that product continues to enjoy the usage, as opposed to then someone looking at an alternative and saying, I'm going to add gas into my own consumption or energy consumption mix. I'm going to add the paraffins, the old, I'm going to add as well anthracite, in terms of, my warming. So if you make it that attractive to a point where, hang on, I think, the price is good, that municipality or the other municipality is not as expensive. It's better to be in this jurisdiction because, they are not as expensive, as, those people. If I load a prepaid meter, that thing is like, there's something eating, those units, within there. So it also goes, into the pricing of that particular product, so that, it's at least affordable, and therefore they can use it, as freely and as more and more they can use it. So even in the other services that they have, Aubrey, we can take, other examples. If you go into the retail space, the same issue happens. There are manufacturers of the rice that, you consume, or the meal that you consume. None of the stores sit with their own farms for the cows and so on. So there's a value chain as well that says they have to source right, as opposed to the public sector. You have to source right, the right quality, it must be consistent, it must be available. And when it goes into the value chain of, the retail store, it's packaged well, it's fresh, and consumers get used to that, to say, oh, that place has, fresh food. I mean, if I want fresh food, I need to I need to go and buy from so and so. If I need, fresh, whatever, and so on. So all of that value chain, goes into the point where someone then says, but is it priced right? So back to the same example. Yeah, it's priced right. I mean, come on, you're paying for quality. You're not paying for just, mass, because it's red meat, you're just paying for the red meat. But you're paying for the quality, and more you have consumers that, come back.
The quality,
the quality is there, the predictability is there, the
it.
convenience is there as well in the case of, the retail side. So the value chain is what we need to be thinking about. And each one of these examples I'm giving, the municipality has its own value chain. The retail has its own value chain. And even the likes of a regulatory or a SARS has its own value chain that it must go through. A UIF has its own value chain. A fast food business has its own value chain. So does an entrepreneur who starts, a shoe polishing stall. There's a value chain to it. You want to get the right polish. You want to see that, that polish that you are using is one that, it's good for my leather shoe. The way they deliver the service, the way they've positioned themselves and so on, and the way they've priced that particular service that, would then say, listen, as opposed to me sitting and soiling my clothes, with polish, I can go to so-and-so by the corner and make sure that they sort my shoes. In fact, I can go and drop all my shoes so that they can polish, all of those shoes and so on. So that value chain, and the value chain to them means, they are convenient, they store my shoes properly. They don't only polish, they also clean, underneath. So there's convenience and there's other things and so on and so forth. So the issue here is that science that we are talking about is that how do you generate your revenue? Okay? You generate your revenue by having a value proposition and services that are fit for the market, that which the market, requires. So there's no use in me going to import, the polish from wherever, hoping that, people will come and use this polish that is imported. If I can use an equally great, brand, which is produced locally and it's affordable, and I can then be able to pass the right price to my customers so that they can come back and use the service more and more and more and more. So that is the science, of it. And I think we'll go into the value chains so that we understand how these value chains hang together to the point where there's a rand at the end of
there's a suggestion in the way that you explain the unfolding of the value chain for the purpose of revenue collection. That it's not just a value chain. It's a value chain that is relevant to the market that you serve. Absolutely. Which suggests a very intimate understanding of the market that you serve. You've spoken just briefly about the pricing right. I may need the rice, but if I can't afford it, then you as a business that uses Ntiyiso's services are not necessarily in business. You've got the product, you've got a market that needs the product, but if it's not priced right, if there's no connection between the product that is needed by the market and the market, then you're not in business. There's a suggestion in that relationship of not only pricing right, of not only having the product or the service, of not only having a value chain, but knowing how that relationship between the product, service, and the market actually work together. It sounds to me like that's part of the science.
And spot on, because the issue here is that there are companies and inventors and entrepreneurs, and you can name them, who have come with one of the best, products. You look at it and you go, wow, this is one of the best, products, that, have ever been invented or manufactured or made. And you wonder why the units of such products are not moving.
Selling, yeah.
They're not selling. Yeah, it's marvelous. It's great, if you look at, the car brands, for instance, let's maybe use that, as an example. You can take, from the luxury German sedans that are there. You can also look at, the Japanese vehicles that are there. You can also now look at, the Asian, more your South Korean and the Chinese, brands, that are coming up. So whereas, in the luxury German sedans, you have various tiers of products. Take, the top end product, which may be an S500, in the Mercedes range. There's a particular clientele that's going to buy those vehicles. It's someone who is highly successful, or someone who is a diplomat, it's government, it's someone who is a CEO or C-band of a particular organization. And you have that market, and the features that, come with it. And now comes, a Japanese, brand, which is, reliable, it runs, and so on and so forth. And they capture that part of the market that says, we don't want, the luxury, but we want the utility nature of this particular product. So you're taking now the value proposition, which becomes, the products and the features, and you are answering a need that says, we want the utility nature of this particular products. And guess what? The meeting of all of those things, product and the market, now equals to a sale. So you've created that value. And that value now is being captured on that point of that sale. And guess what? Everyone then looks at the reliability, the utility nature of this product, and they always come back for that. Yes, the other brands as well will also enjoy the luxury, but there's a particular market that buys into that. But now comes the disruptors who come in and say, okay, we see the luxury features that are there, we see the electric windows, we're going to do it in the small little car. That's going to consume the bottom part of the market. So all of a sudden, you're no longer, exercising. Whenever you open the window there, now you can enjoy some of the features that are there. So now the science of understanding the market that you are serving becomes critical, because you can then originate some of the products and the value propositions and the services that are going to then capture that part of the market. So if I have a choice to go for a big luxury vehicle, and this vehicle which offers almost exactly or similar features, but at half the price of that particular vehicle, and I'm not looking for the utility nature, I'm not looking for the luxury, I'm looking at the comfort, the creature comforts that others are enjoying, and it becomes part of that particular. So you've taken what is essentially can be the same product, and you now have looked at how do you marry the value proposition, the market, the needs that they have, the pricing of that particular product, and throwing in some value adds, so that you all of a sudden now are addressing and capturing a different part of the market that is going to rely on that particular services. And I think that is the science of it. Yep. And where the science has been lost is that if you then take something like a retail supermarket, as we would call it, the assumption is that they'll come and buy. Because we are this big brand, they'll just come and buy. And you don't focus on the other things that, the other new entrants are focusing on, keeping your store clean.
I want to stop you there, because I'm getting a sense that there's another sort of concept that is beginning to come into this science of revenue collection or revenue generation in any business, and that is customer centricity. It's coming out very strongly in the way that you are talking about. But we need to take a break. And I'm hoping that we can go into really discussing customer centricity in greater detail in the process, the scientific process of revenue generation as done by Ntiyiso Consulting for your clients. Please join us as we continue with this conversation about designing ways by which you can scientifically, predictably, be able to get revenue from your clients in whatever industry that you find yourself in. Please stay with us.
The Ntiyiso Consulting Group is an authentically African and globally wide management consulting firm which seeks to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. This impact is delivered through 3 subsidiaries: Ntiyiso Revenue Consulting, Ntiyiso Business Consulting, and Ntiyiso Industrialization Consulting. Our team of over 200 consultants provides sustainable, evidence-based solutions to complex management problems and are subject matter experts in strategy, governance, organizational turnaround, revenue enhancement, and unlocking new economic streams for growth. Visit www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za for more information. Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Truth, trust, results.
Hello and welcome once again as we continue our conversation about how does Ntiyiso Consulting create a situation where its clients have a predictable, consistent revenue collection system within that organization. I suppose if you're going to go into business, you want to go into business with the understanding that you're going to be making money, right? If you're not making money as a business, then you can't call yourself a business that's in business. And I'm here with the Group Chief Advisor, Mr. Miyelani Holeni, to talk about some of the principles that Ntiyiso Consulting adopts in making sure that we demystify the process of revenue collection in any business. Mr. Holeni, we were talking before about the issue of knowing your client, knowing your value proposition, and marrying those two together in order for you to be able to get that value that we call revenue. And what came out of that conversation was a centricity that is essentially part of the process. That means that you've got to be customer centric. It's no good having a product and a service that works very well from a business centricity. It's got to be customer centric. Tell me more.
So, and of course, I mean, that's a business relies on a customer. A customer is the one who drives whether the business is going to be sustainable, it's going to survive, or it's simply going to fold. So the understanding of that customer is crucial because as we've given the example around the car brands, each one can have its own customer base, unique from all the other propositions. And you can take it ad nauseum to the different types of luxury brands that are there. So each one of the businesses, public, private, retail,
whatever,
farming, whatever the case may be, has got a unique clientele that whose problems it must solve all the time and must solve those problems consistently. But the one thing about, you must then know as a business who has the problem that you must solve. Okay, I think that is the origin of all of this. Which customer is it, that I need to solve 1, 2, 3 problems that I've identified for? So the customer centricity, and we've spoken in the other areas. So let's marry it together. There's a segmentation to the customer. So you need to be able to profile each and every one of your customers to understand their behavior. Okay? In some cases, there's a mistake which public sector space make by legislating or wanting to legislate for everything, including behavior. And behavior is, as you understand the term behavior, happens because of a different set of influences, circumstances, situations, economic or internal, external factors. And so there's a combination of factors that, says, if I were to profile the different clients that I have who are buying my services and the buying patterns that are evident, who would they be? Okay, so commonly we know that there will be those ones that are on the top end, and they will always want to buy the most. They'll always want to consume the most. They'll always want to have the attention around them. They'll always, and so on and so forth. Then you'll have the next call it middle of the road type. They will consume more this time, less the other time. They would like some sort of attention because they often have queries because this is not in place. And you can also have the bottom end that says, what, I'll buy when I afford, or I'll pay when I afford, or and typically they're saying, hands off me, I just want to do my own thing. So that is an example of how you can find yourself profiling your customers. Of course, it becomes much more complex than that, because you profile customers from a psychographic point of view as opposed to just the demographic point of view. So, you ought to look at, the psychographic, factors, income, your LSMs, your this, your that, and so on, the size, of, the packages that they are buying, the size of, the houses that they are in, the areas, and so on. So you can use a whole lot of different, the age group, that, they fall, under, the kind of jobs that they are in, and so on and so forth. So those are the factors that if you want to crack the issue of customer centricity, it lies in you understanding your customers in segments and profiling them correctly, so that then you can uniquely service each one of them. It may be the same product, but you can then be able to uniquely service them with regards to the other aspects that, maybe value adds. It may be, in this case, a bit more communication that you would throw into the others. It may be that, you allow them, some electronic access, to this, and so on and so forth. So you can start tailoring various things. And meanwhile, you're still in the same business, but you have changed the way that you interact with them, you communicate with them, you deal with them, you send them, statements, for instance, the way that you remind them, and so on. So you obviously build, some kind of a chemistry with each one of your segments, so that each of those segments then say, I'm going to pay you.
I want to talk at some point about those processes, but what I'm also getting out of what you've just said now is that the customer-centric approach that Ntiyiso adopts in dealing with its clients is precisely that. It's to customize a service for the unique needs of that particular client.
Absolutely.
So what I'm hearing is that it is not just the provision of a consultative service. It is a bespoke, customized service using principles that can be applied to any industry, but it is customized to the very unique needs of that particular customer. And that is what demystifies the process of revenue attraction, the process of revenue attainment. Because I want to be clear in my mind to understand that really what we're trying to say here is that revenue collection can sometimes be mystified. It can be sometimes understood to be this magical thing, that you've got to be some sort of guru in order for you to sustainably get revenues in whatever business that you're in. You're saying to me that if you understand your own value proposition as a company, and you understand the needs of your company, and you align those in the appropriate way, in other words, you customize that, then you can predict, you can demystify. I like your words, you can make it a scientific process with mathematical certainty as to how revenue is going to be gotten. Am I still on the same page?
So let's take it further, because that process, what we do from a Ntiyiso consulting point of view is we crunch data. We collect a lot of data around, the customers, around the services that our clients are selling. We collect that data, and we are able to then crunch it and analyze it and interpret it and create, information that gives us the knowledge and insights into how the client base that they are dealing with, our client is dealing with, behaves. And so we also have to do something very similar, because we can't just walk in cold into a municipality and we have the same kind of approach as we walk into. There's not a one size fits all. But the good thing is that there's a process to each one of these various things. But let me talk a little bit more about the science of data, because data becomes one of those things that they say numbers don't lie. The numbers don't lie. And that is part of us, how we create the truth for that particular client. To say, here is the truth about why your customers are not paying you are not buying your service, are paying you late, are not, honoring whatever arrangements that you have in place, are not coming in through the door to come and buy these particular products. So we have to create that truth using the data. And that is, I think, the other part of the science. And what have we done? We've invested in very sophisticated tools to be able to track the behavior, to be able to track, the various indices of service, to be able to track, for instance. So the science of it is that if you understand using your own data that typically you've collected so for so many years and you are not using it, it means you are missing the science of making sure that, your value propositions to the market that, you are serving, the problems that you are solving, you keep on refining and following a process that is defined, but with continuous improvement. For instance, some of the slogans that we have is we want to get into a place and help the client to get the money, but we also want to make sure that there's continuous improvement. Because you can get the money today, but if you don't keep on the process which gives you continuous improvement, that money will not always flow in the way. So data becomes a very important component of how we create the customer centricity, the value proposition, the problems that we're solving. Because all the time you must be sure that, am I solving this problem the way that my client wants the problem to be solved? Am I providing the service that they want to be able to get on and be able to leapfrog and so on? Do I understand who I am selling this particular service to and how I must sell it to them and how I must position it to them? Yes, it can be the same milk carton, for instance, but perhaps in this case I can have the same milk carton in a glass jar instead of a plastic or instead of a rigid type of container. But so how do I serve all of that? It's still milk, but how do I package it and customize it in that way? So I think the science that we're talking about is the fact that if you look at, for instance, how SARS have done some of the things. Yes, they may not be selling a product because they are taking money from our pockets, but all they are saying is that, hey, we're putting an e-filing system. Aubrey, we're going to make it easy for you to give us, our money. Okay? You just need to go and file and, declare this and declare that and so on. Okay, fine. If you don't want to use e-filing, you can still walk into our offices, but just know that, it's onerous. It's not nice to be queuing there. And so you can still do it in that way. Or you can go and have, a set of people that, carries out that service for you and interacts with us as SARS on your behalf, and everything is sorted, within the same product. At the end of the day, you must pay SARS their dues. You must pay. Okay? But they've made ways and means of simplifying how the flow of that money is. Why? Purely because of data. And guess what? They now have large business sections where they deal with business. They don't want to deal with, me who is small guy in the street, hawker, whatever the case may be. They want to deal with business. And they are collecting data on business in such a way that, they know the directors. They can even tell you what the directors ate last night. Okay? How can they do that? Because they will know the expenditure because they're also collecting information from the banks. They know that, they were at this fancy restaurant, whatever the case may be. They will know that, by the registration plate, they drive, this car. It means, then they must be earning X amount of money. So when that e-filing tax, whatever process comes in, they can then look and say, hi, Aubrey.
There's something you're not telling me.
Something, because why? They've segmented, they are using data, and they understand the client and the customer whom they are dealing with. And they understand some of the problems that, hey, this one doesn't have time. They just want to file and run. This one has time because, their things are complex. This one even employs, experts to do this thing because, and so on. So those are some of the ways that, if you look at the value chain of, SARS is now collecting more money. It's using now systems as well. It's automating as well, which are some of the other concepts that you need to be thinking about when you're dealing with the science of, revenue.
I want to stay alive to the fact that what we are trying to communicate here is the fact that as a service, as a value proposition, as Ntiyiso, is that we want you to have a predictable, we want you to have a consistent, We want you to have an ever escalating trajectory as far as revenue collection is concerned. Sure. And one of the things that I'm getting is the fact that we make that process scientific. We demystify it. And one of the things that's coming out at me now is the fact that we use data, which we interpret and then create the information that is then able to give us the ability to customize whatever service that we as Ntiyiso give to our client. And all of this in the pursuit of the demystification of revenue collection. One of the things that you say is the fact that we are constantly looking for ever improving your rendition of a service or a good. That speaks to the idea that we not only want the revenue to come, but we want it to grow. And we want it to stay consistent. Obviously, there must be processes. We've been talking about the concepts. We've been talking about the principles. Let's talk a little bit about the processes. You've already touched on the fact that there's a very, very big emphasis on the use of data, right? So you use the scientific process of the interpretation and analysis of data. I get that. Talk to me about some of those processes.
So, Aubrey, Friday afternoon, one glorious day in the year 2015, one of the clients that are sitting in our books now, even in a more long-term basis, much longer than we're enjoying a much longer relationship with this particular client. Phone rang Friday afternoon, and you know what Friday afternoon looks like, in a city like Johannesburg. It's time to hibernate, and time to imbibe, other
Sure.
things, that can
Sure.
a bit more exciting than receiving a call about saying, hey, we have a revenue problem in our organization. And it's puzzling because, you're trying to think, hey, you are between me and, the other, things that I need to do. But hang on, let's hear a bit more what the problem is. Our debtors book, is, high up there. Our people are not paying us. Our cash flow is, looking so shabby and the lowest that it has ever been. And we don't know what to do. Okay? Now, ordinarily, you would think, but, hang on, you've got a customer. Don't you have a customer? Just go out and collect. What's the problem? Okay? So let's put the issue into context with regards to what are some of the processes that, one would go through. Obviously, what you see as the debtors book sitting in X amount, X rand, or X billions, okay, is a result of other things that may have not been done properly within the value chain. So then, one of the things we said, hang on, let's have a look at how your value chain is functioning. Number one, okay, do you know all the properties that you are supposed to be billing? Are you billing those properties for the property rates consistently, on time, in full, every month? The other services, do you know what the other services they are consuming from you? Electricity, or is it an ESCOM supplied area, or are you the main supplier of electricity? Okay, tick the box. Now you know that you're supplying them all the 5 services that you typically would. But are you also billing those services at the right tariffs? Okay, so this is a process that we are going through to the point where we say, hang on, 10% of your base, you don't even send them bills. You don't bill them. 20% of your clients, you don't go out and read their meters. Look, you're estimating. 50% of the base at least is receiving some sort of a bill, but maybe the tariffs, ought to be looked at, and so on and so forth. So that is the analysis that, you would go through. So where do you go from? You go through from the genesis of where a value chain starts. If it starts with a property, it goes into what the services are that are provided, and it also goes into now the processes that have to go and measure the consumption of those services. And others are not necessarily measured because they are a formula, where property rates is a formula of this value of the property improvements multiplied by whatever point, whatever percentage. It's consistent, you know you must bill it. But if you don't bill it consistently, guess what? You're not going to be paid consistently.
I want you to stop there because we've got to take a commercial break. But what I'm getting now is that there are certain disciplines that must be applied in the revenue collection process if we are going to demystify it, if we are going to make it consistent, if we're going to make it predictable. There are certain disciplines that must be applied if revenue collection and revenue creation is going to be something that is a part of the DNA of this business. I want to talk about that discipline of process that you are bringing into the conversation now. Please stay with us as we continue this conversation about designing organizations that have a demystified, I suppose, revenue collection character about them. Please stay with us.
The Ntiyiso Consulting Group is an authentically African and globally wide management consulting firm which seeks to empower institutions that enable Africa's development. This impact is delivered through 3 subsidiaries: Ntiyiso Revenue Consulting, Ntiyiso Business Consulting, and Ntiyiso Industrialization Consulting. Our team of over 200 consultants provides sustainable, evidence-based solutions to complex management problems and are subject matter experts in strategy, governance, organizational turnaround, revenue enhancement, and unlocking new economic streams for growth. Visit www.ntiyisoconsulting.co.za for more information. Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Truth, trust, results.
Mielane Holeni is his name. He's the Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting, and we're talking about the very, very critical issue of getting money from your clients. Yeah, we can call it revenue collection, we can call it all sorts of fancy names, but the reason why you're in business is because you're trying to get the money in. And we've been talking about the fact that that process needs to be demystified. That process needs to be made scientific. That process needs to be made predictable. And we've been talking about a number of principles, like, for example, we need to customize. Yeah? I mean, for me, that was very, very important, that it can't just be a matter of you've got a product or a service and a value proposition and you sit back thinking that the money is going to come in. There are certain things that you need to do that are about aligning your value proposition, your goods and services, to the needs of your client. Now you've got a business. There's a communication process taking place between your business and the people or the market that you serve. We've gone further. We've spoken about the issue of data, the data collection that gives you, and through very, very well-educated interpretive processes, the analysis of that data, you're then able to create a story. You're then able to give information as to what are the variables that need to be understood in order for the process of revenue creation, of getting the money, to be more predictable, to be more scientific, less hocus pocus, right? Yeah. You then made it very clear that there are disciplines in the process of attracting that revenue. Go back to that. I want to hear more.
So the issue of the discipline, and I can take any example. Let me maybe start with a retail shop. Okay, Woolies are not paying me, but I will put it out there as one of them. The discipline of how they've laid out their shop space or their shop floor is one that starts to channel you in a particular way. Because consistently when you walk into their store, you know that, you're going to encounter flowers, you're going to encounter the veggies, the fruits, the greens, well laid out, in a lush, So they almost create a market. You can almost come in and just want to shop within that area. And you're done. That's it. Your vegetables, your fruits, your flowers for your loved one, and your whatevers, and so on. And you can even smell the chicken. So as you're moving along, you start smelling the chicken. In some of the stores, you start smelling the coffee, and you start thinking, hey, I need to buy coffee as well. You grab, coffee. You've got coffee there, hey, muffins, there's the bakery there, the nice smell of what they're baking within their bakery. And it's consistent. The chicken, as you've mentioned it. So as you go along into the more hard, things of, now even having to buy toilet paper, those things, come in. There's a link, to it, as you flow. And you can almost walk in whichever fashion that, so you can make your own trip within there. And I'm sure people make different trips within there in a customized. That's the customization, by the way, if you take it in practical terms, that I will walk, from the veggies, I'll go and pick up the fruits, and from there I'll go to their confectionaries, I'll go to the where they cook the food, and then I'll get a cup of coffee, and then from there I'm walking now into the soaps, and then I'm walking. And as I go through the aisle, hang on, there is still attractive things that, are still there. I'm grabbing this, I'm grabbing a packet of chips, and maybe I'm hungry, I'm grabbing some nuts, and as you're walking, across, that maze to the point where you get to the end, guess what? They've collected all the money that they need to collect from you, because
they've maximized the revenue collection process.
Absolutely.
So you might have gone into Woolies thinking all I wanted to buy was some oil.
Absolutely.
But you end up buying wine gums, you end up buying a magazine, you end up buying the chicken and the narchis because of the way that they've laid out their shop.
Absolutely.
I'm also getting that you're saying to me that that's not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence.
You're saying to me that that's design.
That's a design. And that design becomes a discipline that every day. So imagine if you walk into your favorite store and they've changed the layout. You are disoriented, and you are looking for the things that, give you familiarity, and you're not finding those things that are familiar, okay? So if SARS doesn't send out, a message or open the season for tax collection, and they just keep quiet, guess what? No one is going to file. No one is going to put up, and say, oh, I have to. It's only the few that perhaps, have become so ingrained in all of this. If you don't receive a bill from your own store, whether it's a retail store or whether it's your bank or whether it's the municipality, guess what? And
those are the disciplines.
Those are the disciplines that, have to be in place to say, I get a bill round about, this time. And even better these days, they send me an SMS. And I can see exactly what I'm in for. Hey,
they give me an app.
And they give me an app where I can log in and go, and when I'm doing my other transactions, I can also put them as part of my transactions for the month. Guess what? They also allow me to put a debit order so that, I know exactly. So my bill is predictable. Okay? So we go back to where we started, from the supply. My meter is read every month. So all of those things, culminate in a point where you get to the consistency, you get to a point where you say, yeah, it's in that ballpark figure. If there's something wrong, they solve my problem very quickly. They don't wait and string me along for too long. They solve it very quickly and say, hey, we can see what's wrong. It's because of X, Y, Z. We're sending our technical teams. There's a leakage wherever, okay? And even, in the likes of the retail, for instance, if your car breaks down, those guys have even got, hotlines or whatever the lines that, you can phone them. BMW on call,
So what you're saying to me, I mean, it really links to the conversation we started right at the beginning. That we need to remove the mysticism, the mystique in the process of getting the money as a business. And that is a very critical value proposition that Ntiyiso Consulting offers.
Absolutely.
that we are going to help you get the money.
Yeah.
And it's not, you don't have to slaughter anything. We have done the work because we understand that there's data, there's information that we can get to be able to understand the unique issues of your business that allows us to customize our value proposition with the very unique requirements of your business. So there's a very strong customer centricity in the approach. But you're also saying that the value proposition itself cannot work if it is not worked. Because that's what I'm getting now. That if the value proposition is not worked, in other words, you can't just put up a website or hire office space and think that the business is going to make money.
Yeah.
The value proposition has to be actively worked. Those are the processes that you've been talking about.
Absolutely.
To the point where you can think that you were talking about Woolworths for a second there. And I've wondered why it is that every time I walk into Woolworths, very clear in my mind that I'm just going to get the oil. I walk out of that shop with magazines, pajamas, shoes, and you're saying to me it's because of the way that they've laid out their shop, and that is not a coincidence. It is a matter of them understanding their client, customizing their value proposition for that particular client, that's me, such that they can maximize, get as much money out of me as possible. And that is what Ntiyiso Consulting offers their clients, the ability to demystify the getting of the money.
Absolutely. And I think that process of getting the money made scientific with those particular disciplines, which are basic in a way. So it means you must be able to all the time make sure that, the meter is read, make sure that the bill is compiled, correctly, make sure that I receive my statement, remind me that, I haven't paid you, make available a platform for me to pay you. And all, if you repeat those things every time, and I gave an example of a retail store that keeps their layout. If they were going to change their layout, it must be informed now by the new patterns, which, are data-driven. When I started, in my younger days, tinkering with business intelligence, systems, there was one particular example we used to give, especially in an area where there are younger sort of, families, newly married, new babies, coming in and so on and so forth. And typically it's a mjita like you and I who loves, their sport and whatever the case may be. When your wife, sends you to go and buy nappies, guess what? Those stores arrange themselves in such a way that, when you pick up the nappies, you also pick up the 6-pack of beers.
Yeah.
So can you see how
Yeah.
the relationship between nappies, what's the relationship between diapers
And beer.
and beer? Okay? Because you're going to watch, the game
it's
in the
Milan.
afternoon. So those are some of the things that, if you take them in that particular way, when you buy something, it normally associates, with the other thing. And look at, during COVID, for instance, can you explain why people were buying so much toilet paper? I mean, there was not enough toilet paper. Guess what? Because they were also stockpiling on food. So that,
Yes,
isn't there a
good-
connection?
absolutely, I see
So
it.
if you start putting your products and your value propositions in such a way that, hang on, you can't manage a postpaid meter because I'll give you a prepaid meter. No, sure, no problem. You just need to load the meter with the units, because you want to see your consumption and you want to switch off geysers and do whatever the case may be. I'm not going to waste my time selling you a luxury sedan. You need a utility vehicle, man. Man, you are into laying pipes and all of those. I'm going to give you the latest and greatest in terms of, utility vehicles that are even 4x4 that you can navigate the terrain and so on. So that is how at least, you start to create those disciplines. But guess what? If I go through a bank and I don't have a debit order, guess what? They can't collect the money. Yeah. But they ensure that they get the debit order. And guess what? The insurance, comes on top. It's a debit order. And then they sell you, if your windscreen cracks, what happens. And then, tire, damage, and so on. So you can just see that, some of those retailers or the segments of stores arrange themselves, to understand how to maximize, the income, their share of the wallet, and to be able to grab it. Take a simple thing like, TV licenses. SABC, free broadcasting. Is it really free? But now we have to pay TV licenses. Look at how over the years they've evolved themselves to even going to a point of saying, you can't buy a television unless you have a TV license, because they want to collect their money up front. Guess what? Once you've consumed your soapy, and you are laughing all the way, to go and discuss this thing with your friends and so on, you're not thinking of a TV license payment. And in fact, it's not my problem as a kid. My parents must worry about, a TV license. So you can see how the linkage is in terms of, the collections, and do it often. It mustn't be that, this time they want the license, the other times they don't. This time they don't send me a message, to collect the TV licenses. But look at how others like your DSTV have now even innovated this. If you don't pay, guess what? You're off air. Sure. And, the kids will be saying, hey, Dad, look at the notification there. It's E40 whatever. It means you haven't paid, Dad. So those are just some of the ways that, those disciplines, are always there. If I don't pay for my services, I get cut off. I have to go and start, a process. If I start a process, I must make an arrangement. If this happens, so those disciplines must always be in place, to the point where others may call it credit management or credit control, but there's someone in the background, and there are systems which are determining, you go after this, now leave this one, because we know that, they get paid on the 15th. We know they'll pay us. Yes, it's after due date, and so on. But on the 15th, you watch. This one will pay us. Don't bother them, okay? We know who the infrequent people are that pay infrequently. We know the people who never pay us. Therefore, these are the ones who are going to chase them. We know the ones who pay grudgingly because they short pay us. We know who our star payers are. Don't irritate the star payers, but make sure that those processes keep on reminding them and leading them, through the aisle, to the point where at least you have now a concept that says, my revenue is complete. It's complete. I have billed everyone that I needed to bill. I have been paid by everyone who is supposed to pay me. And I know them by name, because at least I can see. The retailers may not have the benefit of knowing, but guess what they do? Now they give you a store card, which is a loyalty card. They know, man, that Aubrey has bought. They know that Aubrey has bought because, you swiped, the card, that allows you to keep track of that data. And they know what you bought the previous time. So that is the aspects of it that says that discipline of keeping to each and every one of the small processes that culminate in that revenue being in the till now, and now being in the bank account.
Mealani, I want to thank you for a passionate explanation of why we're in business. It's not going to help for us to open up shops, to get all sorts of infrastructure in place, if at the end of the day we don't get the money in. And I think that what Ntiyiso Consulting is underscoring here is that the business cycle must be closed. You can start a business, we can serve a particular need in the community and in the market, but at the end of the day, that business has got to be a revenue collecting entity. It must make money, otherwise it's not even worth being called a business. I'm really hoping that as you've listened to this conversation, you understand that the getting of the money, the getting of the revenue does not have to be a mysterious process, that it can be scientific, that it can be predictable, that it can be customized. I want to thank you very much for tuning in today, and I hope that when we go into the next conversation with Mealani about making that a consistent consistent and ever rising trajectory, the getting of money, I'm hoping that you'll be able to join us and tune into the conversation. Thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated.